Conspiracy theories and accusations of fake news routinely fly in some quarters across the political spectrum, and particularly in the Twitter feed of the current U.S. president. Such talk feeds a climate of misinformation and even disinformation. And if that's not unnerving enough, a new book by Nina Schick exposes a whole other level to this problem. It's called Deep Fakes, The Coming Infocalypse, and it brings Nina Schick to our virtual studio tonight from London, UK. It's great to meet you, Nina. How are you doing?
Good to be with you, Steve.
Well, I do want to start with the two words of the title of your book, which may be unfamiliar to our viewers and listeners, Deep Fakes and Infocalypse, as in an apocalypse about information. But let's start with deep fakes. What is a deep fake?
A deep fake is essentially a type of synthetic media. That is to say, a piece of fake media. It can be an image, it can be a video, it can be a piece of text, it can be a bit of audio that's synthetically generated or manipulated by AI. And the ability of artificial intelligence to actually create from scratch fake media is nascent. It's only been around for about 3 to 4 years, and it's progressively getting better. This is a huge potential risk, because if you look at the last 10 years and you kind of consider the crisis of bad information that seems to have become standard in our information ecosystem, fake media generated by AI is going to make it a whole lot worse. And that is essentially what a deep fake is.
Well, let's give an example of what you're talking about here, and we'll show a brief clip here of a fellow saying something that you know, under normal circumstances, he would never actually say. Here we go. Sheldon, roll the clip if you would.
In this age of information and misinformation, we know deepfake videos have never been easier to produce. For example, it would be easy now to make me say ridiculous things like, "I'm injecting sunshine. That's why my face is orange." Or, "I think I deserve a Nobel Prize," meaning a gift card to half of Barnes & Noble. But instead of doing that, I would like to use this technology to say something useful, like, "I'm sorry."
Now, you can tell that that's not really him. It's pretty good, but you can tell it's not, and not just because of the apology at the end. You can tell it's not him. But how far away are we from, boy, I can't tell anymore?
Well, in some cases of synthetic media, we're already there. For example, images that have been generated by AI. For any viewer who wants to get an idea of how sophisticated and how good it is, you can go to thispersondoesnotexist.com. Every time you refresh the page, you'll get a new face of a human who does not exist, that's simply been generated by AI. And for the other more complicated media that AI will generate, such as video, we're already getting there. It's getting so good, so quick. So it's inevitable that we're going to end up within the next few months, within the next few years, at a stage where, to the human eye, any synthetic media, anything that's generated by AI is going to be indistinguishable from the authentic piece of media. So that's an inevitability. Even if we're not quite there yet, it's happening and it's coming fast.
The implications are incredible, and we'll talk about those in a second, but I don't want to get away from the title of your book just yet. Infocalypse, that's the second word that I don't think I've ever seen that word before. You want to give us your best definition of it?
Yeah, well, it's a play on information apocalypse. And what I use the word to define in my book is the state of our increasingly dangerous and corroding information ecosystem. Because if you look at the kind of technological advancements of the information age, the internet, the smartphone, social media, now increasingly the coming age of synthetic media, that is media that's generated by AI, it's had this overwhelming effect where the age of information is actually becoming the age of bad information and disinformation, because we had assumed that all of these technological advances would be this unmitigated good for humanity. And what it is simply an amplifier, as a matter of fact, of human intention. So just as it's amplified the best parts of humanity, it's also amplifying the worst. And now we don't have any safeguards in this new information ecosystem, to the extent where I say we're in this infocalypse. We're reaching an information ecosystem which is increasingly corroding and dangerous, and AI is going to make that even more dramatic.
Well, when you talk about amplifying the worst, how do we want to say this here? It's actually not politics, it's pornography, that the deep fakes are, really incredibly disturbing. Why is it that porn has become kind of the thing when it comes to deep fakes?
Well, porn is pioneering, just as when the internet was first created and people thought, oh, nobody's going to use that strange thing. That's just for weird geeks sitting in front of their computer screens. The internet became a place for porn. And it's just the same with deepfakes. As soon as it turned out that people could use AI to generate fake media, the first use case was in non-consensual pornography. And that's actually where the name deepfake comes from, because the first kind of deepfakes that really hit the public imagination 3.5 years ago were in the form of non-consensual porn on Reddit, and the guy who posted them was somebody called Deepfakes. And he made these fake porn films of celebrities, but it's now become a problem where it's got its own internet ecosystem, and it's not only female celebrities who are targeted. Normal women are targeted too, because the AI can be trained to generate fake pornography of you based on just a few digital images that can be taken from your social media, for example. And now we're also starting to see very disturbing deepfake porn of minors. But I don't see these two things as mutually exclusive. Although pornography leads the way, it is inevitable that deepfakes will also be used in politics and in fraud and all kinds of other avenues where they can be used as disinformation against individuals in a way that hasn't been possible before.
And we seem to be, as a species, hardwired to believe what we see on a video. And therefore, talk to us about the implications of believing what we see when what we see is phony.
Well, it's something that psychologists call processing fluency. So when we see visual information that looks right, that looks real, we're hardwired to want to believe it. And this is happening at a time when video is in fact becoming the most important medium of communication. I think 82% of internet traffic next year is going to be driven by the upload and download of videos. So the fact that video as a medium of communication, a medium which we place so much rigor onto, which we assume to be an extension of our own perception, can be undermined at a time when it's becoming the most important medium of communication is really alarming. But there's a counter effect to this too. And this is that as knowledge of deepfakes start to grow, something called the liar's dividend starts to enhance. So as people become aware that we're entering an epoch where seeing is no longer believing, you can see something with your eyes that looks genuine and authentic, and it could be fake, then you start to deny the veracity of all authentic media as well. And that is, of course, something that's great for bad actors. In a world where anything can be faked, including something that until now we assume is evidence, everything can also be denied.
Well, since you've talked about bad actors, let's talk about the Soviet Union and/or Russia, shall we? There's nothing. Certainly the technology in this is new, but what it attempts to do is not new. And the Soviets and Russians have been all over disinformation for decades and decades. There was something called Operation Infection with a K, not a C. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I start my book with Soviet disinformation campaigns because the entire spirit of the Infocalypse, this corroding information ecosystem, the use of information as a weapon, as a tool of warfare, is something that the Soviets have mastered. They've been at it for decades. It's just that the tools now are becoming increasingly potent. And I kind of track in my book how Soviet disinformation campaigns have become far more potent thanks to the technology, even though the tactics and the strategy is the same. Operation Infection is the dastardly Soviet lie, which was spread in the 1980s, that the HIV virus was actually created by the CIA and the American military in order to kill African-American men and gay people. Now, this was a disinformation seed that was planted over 10 years. It took 10 years to go viral, but to this day, it forms some public attitudes towards HIV. So the effects of this lie are still felt today. Whereas what's happening now in the Infocalypse is that Soviet disinformation can spread far quicker with a far bigger audience, and it isn't a case of spreading over 10 years. It can go viral, of course, within seconds or days.
Let's do another one. Project LACTA. What's that about?
Project LACTA are the influence operations that the Soviets ran, well, not the Soviets, excuse me, the Russian Internet Research Agency ran in the lead up to the US election in 2016. And the aim was to use social media in order to drive polarization into American society. And what was really interesting about Project LACTA is that Russian agents in St. Petersburg infiltrated Western social media platforms posing as authentic Americans. And far from the conventional narrative that they only targeted Trump voters, they also targeted a lot of groups on the left and started playing identity politics and had a disproportionate focus on the African American community. And they ran over years these influence campaigns, which were first aimed at building up distinct pride and identity in various identity groups. So by injecting Facebook groups, Instagram groups, fake profiles with memes and content so that the people who are following these groups would feel very proud in their racial identity or their sexual orientation. And then as they started coming closer and closer to the election, they started injecting these groups with legitimate, sometimes, grievances about how they were alienated they were from the mainstream. And they used it actually as a way to make sure that African American voters felt so disenfranchised and so alienated from the mainstream that they wouldn't go and vote in 2016. So Project LACTA was Russian influence operations on social media in the run-up to the 2016 election that started all the way back as 2013. And essentially what they were doing was playing identity politics and driving polarization into American discourse.
And how satisfied was Vladimir Putin with the way it worked out?
Well, I don't think he could have imagined, in his wildest dreams that they would have had such success in an election that was decided by, a mere 70,000 votes. I say in my book, it would be very foolish and unwise to say that Donald Trump won because of the Russians, and what has happened since the 2016 election is so interesting because the fact which has been established by all Western intelligence agencies and a bipartisan US Senate committee that Russia intervened in the 2016 election and intervened in favor of Donald Trump, that itself has become a partisan statement. You can debate, how much influence they had, whether or not the Trump campaign was involved in some way or another in collaborating with Russian agents, but to say that they didn't intervene at all is simply not true. So this shows you how powerful this disinformation is. The mere objective reality that this happened itself has become a partisan statement.
Well, of course, Trump has been saying that for 4+ years. And in fact, you described the presumably outgoing American president as the embodiment of infocalypse. What does that mean?
Absolutely, because Trump, I think, is not the cause, but rather it's how he uses information as a weapon is the very embodiment of this chaotic and crazy information ecosystem. And you can't talk about disinformation or information warfare that's waged against the West by foreign actors like Russia and increasingly other state actors like Iran and China without looking at the disinformation threat that's emanating from within Western society itself. And there is no doubt that one of the most prolific purveyors of disinformation, not only in the Western world, but in the world, period, is Donald Trump, who ironically also happens to be the leader of the free world. You've actually had this quantified in studies. I think it was a University of Stanford study earlier this year where they found that the single biggest purveyor relating to COVID misinformation, both in terms of his reach and impact, was Donald Trump. And you see it right now as well, because this narrative of a rigged election, that somehow there's been widespread orchestrated voter fraud in the US election, is simply untrue. It's baseless. And yet this is something that Donald Trump and his associates have been seeding in the public narrative now for months. It's been starting in April. And this strategy, this disinformation campaign essentially started as soon as they realized that COVID would lead to more mail-in ballots, and that might actually give the Dems an advantage. And he's been continuing ever since the votes have come in and it's clear that Biden is the winner. This is the most destructive disinformation campaign of this election. The data now suggests that there is a huge partisan divide when it comes to who actually believes this election was run fairly. Before the election happened, 68% of Republicans said they trusted that this would be a fair election. Now that number stands at 34%. So it's incredibly destructive to trust in the democratic process.
Having said that, he's tried really hard to make the case, but he's only had the assistance, I think, of a couple of, particularly egregious primetime hosts on Fox News. Even Fox, owned by Rupert Murdoch, and the New York Post, owned by Rupert Murdoch, have basically said it's over. The news division of Fox has said it's over. There's no evidence for what you're talking about. So I wonder whether you think these efforts have hit a wall.
I don't think they've hit a wall. I think it's interesting that some parts of the, Trump supporting establishment have said it's over, notably Fox, New York Post. However, if you look on social media right now, if you look on kind of Trump supporting factions of social media, this disinformation, this myth that somehow the election was stolen is going rampant. It's viral. There are people organizing Stop the Steal rallies. I already mentioned the data amongst Republican voters where they say that their trust that this election was freely and fairly has basically halved over the course of 10 days. This is a pernicious seed of disinformation, which in my view is going to foster and fester and get progressively worse over the next 4 years. It's a terrible situation to be in, where a large portion of 70 million American citizens who voted for Donald Trump over the next 4 years legitimately believe that somehow this election was stolen from him. And he is having a tremendously powerful sway in terms of pushing this narrative, even if others aren't supporting him.
Having said that, you do say in the book, the U.S. and its Western allies appear vulnerable and immobilized in the face of the infocalypse. And given that you've described it very well, we know it exists, we understand that it's happening, why do we seem to be so immobilized in the face of all this?
Well, I think there's several things going on. Number one, I would say that this is a complete paradigm change in the way that we understand information and the way that our societies are dealing with information in the age of information. There is still this belief that somehow the age of information would be this unmitigated good for humanity. And only now, after we build the cool technology, are we starting to see that there are adverse effects as well. Every time we've had huge technological developments in the way that we communicate, it's taken some time for society to catch up. So when we invented the printing press, there were 400 years between the invention of the printing press and modern photography. And the printing press, led to the European Reformation, changed the course of history. Over the past 30 years, we've had the internet, social media, smartphones, now AI-generated synthetic media, and it's just too much for society to cope with. So the starting point, I think, is putting this conceptual framework, connecting the dots around the fact that AI-generated fake porn, Russian disinformation, false claims about stolen elections, they're all interconnected within this corroding information ecosystem, which I call the infocalypse. The second thing I'd say about political action, and you see it very, very vividly in terms of what's playing out right now in the United States, is that if there are political actors who have a vested interest in the infocalypse, that is the corrosion of reality, the corrosion of objective truth, then of course it's much harder to take action against it, because simply saying that this is disinformation, and undoubtedly that is a fact vis-a-vis what Trump is claiming about the election right now, is seen as a partisan statement. And that's the problem when it comes to the infocalypse and taking political action on it.
All right, in which case, if there is a segment of, let's stick with the U.S. situation. If there's a segment of the population that just is not open to your arguments about this because they are so deeply invested in the president and so on and so forth, let's talk about everybody else. What can they do to ensure that they are not the victims of this fraud going forward?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to put this conceptual wrapper around the corroding information ecosystem. And once you have that conceptual framework in place, it's much easier to understand what's going on and how everything fits in. And rather than getting tied up in the currents, the polarizing currents of the infocalypse itself, I think we need to focus on fixing the architecture of the information ecosystem. This can broadly be done under two categories of solutions. The first are the kind of technical solutions. So as AI-generated fakes become ubiquitous and become better and better, so they cannot be distinguished by the human eye, we're going to have to develop the software, AI-generated software, to detect the fakes. We're going to have to do it because there's going to be too many fakes. We're not going to be able to see them. Secondly, we're going to have to inbuild provenance architecture into our information ecosystem as well. So that's writing into the hardwire of our devices the technology that will prove that a piece of media is authentic from its inception. This will be very useful for people like us, journalists, human rights activists, to show that this video is authentic, this photo is authentic, this interview is authentic, because it's always watermarked as such. Those are kind of broadly the technical solutions. But then you have a whole plethora of societal solutions as well. You have to talk about digital literacy, updating our regulatory and policy frameworks, understanding what a society as a whole needs to do in order to become more resilient in the face of these information threats. And I think that's really where a lot of the discussion needs to be focused right now, in terms of what do we need to do? Where are the boundaries between free speech and censorship, and all of these debates that are so polarizing at this moment?
Nina, let me set up the next question by reading something that Jordan Peterson said, the University of Toronto professor, whom we know very well over here, and I guess you guys know him now over there as well. He wrote, "Wake up. The sanctity of your voice and your image is at serious risk. It's hard to imagine a more serious challenge to the sense of shared, reliable reality that keeps us linked together in relative peace. The deepfake artists need to be stopped using whatever legal means are necessary, and as soon as possible." Do you think legislation can solve this problem?
Legislation should play a part in solving the problem. For example, right now, if you are a victim of deepfake pornography, non-consensual deepfake pornography, you have very little legal recourse. And this includes even minors who are being targeted in this way. Interestingly, Dr. Peterson was targeted by a deepfake because essentially a machine learning model was created of his voice. So anybody could go to a website called notjordanpeterson.com, type in some text, and make it his voice say things that he had never done. And the reason I bring this up is because I really want your viewers to understand that the really scary thing about deepfakes is that they can be taught to hijack your biometrics, to take a clip of your voice, to take a few photos of you from social media, and then recreate you either in audio format, video format, or image format, doing insane things that you never did. So this is not only disinformation in the sense that we might think of it in the political sphere. This is a tool that is going to be accessible to anyone, because the technology will basically be wrapped up in things like smartphone apps, where anybody anonymously can hijack your biometrics to make you say and do things. So it's not only going to be used in politics or fake pornography, but also in fraud. And that indeed is what we're already starting to see with deepfakes as an emerging use case, this technology being used in fraud in deeply individual and personal ways.
And just finally, do you think enough people are seized of this issue to want to do something about it?
I think that the groundswell is gathering. There are lots of initiatives, groups, and people starting to mobilize in terms of mitigating against the risks of not only deepfakes but disinformation. But I will say that the most successful approach can only come by taking a networked approach to this problem. So legislators alone can't solve it. The tech platforms alone can't solve it. You have to take a networked approach, both in terms of engaging civil society, policymakers, and the tech platforms, to try and deal with this huge problem, which is actually the corroding information ecosystem.
Well, I have to tell you, I'd never heard of the word deepfake until I read your book. So I learned a heck of a lot. Nina Schick, Deepfakes, The Coming Infocalypse. Thank you for writing the book, and it was great of you to join us on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.